Dom, thank you so much for joining me. Now, you've just tried to pretend that the toy collection is your son's, and I don't believe you.
We share it. As much as I like to say that they're his, I have commandeered them, so they are in my office because I think they look cool. So I've picked out the best of the best, in my opinion.
Although I'm pretty sure I'm spotting a McDonald's one there. Am I spotting a McDonald's Space Jam one?
Yeah, that's there's a couple Space Jam ones, which again, he doesn't think they're cool, but I think they're kind of cool because I liked the original Space Jam as a kid, so I'm a geek that way.
No. Mine have got into Space Jam because of the McDonald's toys. So
Yeah.
they kind of rule. But we're not talking about toys, we're talking about third-party risk. So a lot of your clients, I think, fit into that SME category where they are probably considered suppliers to some of these big companies. So what are you seeing? Are these companies coming under a lot of pressure? Are they feeling it?
Oh yeah, and that's a really good question, Carl. I've had the gift of being able to focus exclusively on the SME space for the almost past 7 years now, and really, in terms of levers, in terms of why to invest in cybersecurity, this past year I've seen the greatest amount of, I guess, energy coming from the SMEs wanting to invest in cybersecurity. Main reason being is that they are getting pressed hard from a supply chain risk perspective. Many of these are B2B organizations, and that they now realize that they can't sell their service, their platform, what have you, to large organizations because they are clamping down on supply chain risk. So now it's not just about investing in cybersecurity to avoid a possible data breach or other, what if scenarios. It's very much affecting the bottom line. It is affecting their growth because they cannot sell their services or products. So it's been very, very interesting to see very incentivized people investing in cybersecurity because they have to. Their very business is at stake.
Well, I think that's good news for all of us. And are they kind of finding that customers are coming and auditing them or visiting them, or have we not got to that stage yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. And part of the problem too, Carla, is that I'll refer to it as a lack of standardization, even within the same sector. I have an insurtech client who they sell basically their platform to a bunch of different insurance organizations throughout North America. Every insurance company is treating it differently. There's some who just send a very basic spreadsheet and they don't really check to see if you've answered it, properly or not. Others put you through the ringer, right? So even within the same industry, you have great disparity in terms of, the actual process, and that in itself too makes it very difficult for the, again, especially the small organizations who are trying to figure out, well, where is that line? If some of them want, all this extra security, some of them are just okay with, the bare minimum. Where do they draw the line? So I think, over the next few years, I think it's going to take several years before we see that level of standardization, like I said, even within certain industries, let alone different industries.
And I think when we talk about companies coming to their suppliers, we talk a lot about, how does that affect the relationship, and how they kind of feel about it and how you can work with them. So would you say your clients on the whole feel like they're being supported and that they're getting that relationship and it's enhancing it? Or would you say they feel like I'm being told what to do and pushed around a little bit?
Yeah. Well, you're asking just great questions, one after another here. You're roll, Carla.
You think I've done this before?
I don't know why I'm surprised. I'll go back to my earlier answer. Again, it's again that lack of standardization, in which there are some, and the ones that I prefer, especially when we're engaged as a VC, so to our clients, those where it's a collaborative approach, right? So when the large organization is saying, what, we recognize you're a smaller business. Here's what we'd like to see now. Let's work on a roadmap in terms of what we'd like to see in the future. That to me is how it should be done, right? That is true collaboration. Others are saying, no, it's this way or the highway, and they have very unrealistic expectations from a security perspective in terms of what a small business is able to achieve. So I've had numerous clients where we've gone through a process and they're being assessed, at least in my eyes, in the way that a multinational company would be assessed from a security perspective. A startup of 15 people, as an example, they're not going to have the same level of security as a 5,000 person company in the same space. So I think organizations that are doing those assessments, they have to realize that they can't take that same approach, right? They need to understand that security, at the end of the day, is very much a journey for every organization, and it's going to look different at every organization. So while a standardization approach is useful, they still need to almost have different buckets, because the way you would assess an enterprise company, very different than the way you would assess a startup. So to me, like I said, those who understand it's a collaboration, I think are going to be striking that right balance between doing their due diligence from a supply chain risk management perspective, but also not pushing away innovation, because those that are taking security to the nth degree, they're going to be losing out on innovative collaborative partners, right? And that in itself is a threat to the business as well.
Yeah, and I think what we see is there's been a big focus on what vulnerabilities companies have. There hasn't necessarily been as big a focus on what impact they have to your business, and also the threat profile. The threat profile of a big business is very different to the threat profile of a much, much smaller organization. So kind of sounds like organizations haven't matured their programs to that extent just yet, from what you're seeing.
Exactly, or even from a risk-oriented or data-centric approach. Like I said, right now, for a lot of organizations, their vendor risk management or supply chain risk management, their process is basically sending a massive Excel spreadsheet with tens of thousands of questions that they want answered in under a week, kind of thing. And again, it's the, sure, is this really due diligence? I would say no, it's not, right? It's more, CYA covering one's ass, but it's not really true due diligence, because you're not narrowing it down and making it specific to the organization that you're assessing. An example I'll give is, there's another client of mine. They are a SaaS company. They don't deal with any sensitive data whatsoever. Yet they've had organizations put them through the ringer in terms of data security controls. Well, if the risk is non-existent or very low from a data perspective, why are you overemphasizing data security controls, right? Right size it. What's the true risk then? If the data security is an issue, okay, maybe let's look at other things that may be more applicable. But again, it's that blanket approach, trying to just cover everything, is, like I said, most large organizations do vendor risk management or supply chain risk management very poorly.
And are the companies that you're working with, are they now looking at their supply chain, or are we not there yet?
That's an ongoing maturity. Let's put it that way. It certainly does depend. There are, and for me, I look at it not necessarily from a number perspective, but from a what's the risk depending on another vendor. So as an example, if you're a small business, and because we've had small businesses, and when we talk about vendor risk management, they say, well, we only rely on one vendor. I say, well, the number isn't important necessarily, right? What does that vendor have access to, right? That to me is contextually more important, right? You could have half a dozen vendors that don't really touch anything sensitive or really introduce any risk to the organization. The number isn't important. It's the contextual risk that is important. So we generally say, if there is a higher level of risk based on if they have remote access to the environment, they're accessing client data, customer data, what have you, that needs to undergo an assessment process or due diligence process. Is that level there right now for most small and mid-sized organizations? No, because still most SMEs still struggle with their own. In fact, we were brought into an organization where they were putting their vendors through greater due diligence and holding their vendors to a higher level of security than what they were doing internally, right? I'm a firm believer that don't ask others to do, and if you're not even doing it yourself, right? So fix yourself inwardly first, then let's deal with with the others. And that's, I think, the space we are right now with the SMEs.
Yeah, I can see that. And obviously the ones that you're working with are ones that are investing a little bit and are taking it seriously. Are you seeing companies that still, aren't ready to work with you, or that are still saying we're too small, or, it's not a problem for us?
Yeah, well, I'd like to say that all of our clients are easy to deal with, but they're not. I'd be lying if I said that. But I'd say the majority of them are to a greater state of enlightenment. But to your point there, I mean, there's still tremendous growth to be had in the SME space. In my mind, we are nowhere near having a majority of SMEs be proactively investing in cybersecurity. They have not seen the light yet, right? It is still, I'd say, the overwhelming majority of SMEs still cling to myths of the mid 90s. You know, we're too small, we're not a target, we don't have sensitive data, that type of thing. That is still the, I'd say, the overwhelming majority. Have things gotten better? Absolutely. Even just in this past year, right, we've gotten further than I was further expecting, and I would say COVID and the move to remote workforce and working from anywhere, that has helped accelerate this process. But like I said, I do think we're still many years out in terms of getting to a spot where the majority of SMEs are proactively investing in cybersecurity.
And what's really scary, one of our other interviews with Ollie Fairbank, who works for us, he was saying how actually we haven't scratched the surface yet on what adversaries and what threat actors can do with the supply chain. And if you're saying our supply chains are nowhere near getting close to what they need to do, we kind of have this perfect storm.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that's where, what I find really interesting again is that as we go deeper and deeper into this, what's called a digital economy, more and more organizations become increasingly digitized, especially at the SME space. Again, this perfect storm truly is brewing, and with the increasing reliance on B2B relationships as well. Again, that's a structure which is not going away anytime soon either. More and more organizations, especially larger organizations, are focusing on core competencies and then having relationships with multiple different organizations to fulfill other functions. So that type of model is here to stay and is only going to get more pervasive as well. Your colleague is absolutely right. I think we've just scratched the surface, right? If you look over the past 8 months or so, to have 2 massive supply chain attacks, or at least known supply chain attacks, come to the surface, that's literally a harbinger. So the next few years are going to be quite interesting from a supply chain perspective.
Well, I think so too. And I think that's a great place to wrap things up. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing what you're seeing in the market.
Thanks, Karla. Next time we'll talk more about the toys.
Absolutely.